I'm now going to hand over to Pete Cooper. Pete's Director of UK Shopping Centres, one of the most creative and biggest brains in the retail property industry, and you've also a man who knows his limitless knowledge about Southampton. So no better person to talk us through some of the great work that we've been doing here at Westquay. Pete.
Okay, so I guess this is really about how you draw together the strands of work that we've seen this morning from the team here, all of this excellent work. How do we use that to create great places where people come to, where more happens, and where we create performance? And how do we do that on a long-term basis as an owner? So I'm just going to take you back. This is a classic Hammerson scheme in many ways. We bought into the scheme and built it and opened it in 2000. I was where's my clicker? There it is. I was really disappointed we couldn't find a photograph back in 2000 of Peter Cole cutting the ribbon as we opened the centre, because one of the things that Peter Cole did for this scheme, which shaped its future in a really visionary way, was to point up at the upper level and said, I think we should put some food up in this scheme. And that was really the genesis of the food court here. I'm pretty sure I remember when we bought into this, the food court wasn't planned, and we added that. And if only we'd been really, as aware as we are today about the importance of food, the visionary moment when that happened probably changed the shape of this scheme forever. It's a very, very vibrant economy. This scheme's very lucky. There's not a lot of competition for quite a long way around. It's a unique economic infrastructure here in many ways. You've got a port, 500 acres of ABP land, which you'll have seen as we came in on the bus, 30 acres alone for car export, so very connected to Swindon and the Midlands with a direct rail link. It's the second biggest port after Felixstowe in the UK. The Army is based here. The Army port is based here. Cunard, we talked about the liners. Every single time a liner does a changeover here, and you know how many there are every year now. That's £2.5 million into the economy of Southampton. So that's £1 billion on its own. And you can only do this if you've got a deep water port. So Southampton's economy is pretty stable and pretty assured, and that's really helpful for us. We've also got one of the only full-line in-town IKEAs in the UK, which emerged right next door to us in 2009, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And there are some great stats around the educational economy here, very, very high-level involvement. Southampton University has a graduate in every single Formula One team in the world. For aerodynamics and hydrodynamics, this is one of the best places you can go to. So all that backdrop makes it very helpful for us to invest confidently here in the longer term. So what I'm going to try and do now is just take you on a bit of a sort of a regional excellence roadmap. We try and keep a two-word phrase for all our assets, just to keep people focused on what we're trying to achieve. And we use regional excellence here, which ties into some of the themes that Sophie was alluding to earlier on about raising the bar, raising quality, giving people memorable experiences, which we can then use to help brands drive performance. So the scale and the quality of the scheme is very helpful to us. It's 1 million square feet, so and it's a very adaptable building, and that's actually very important. You'll remember that phrase as we go through this presentation. We've been able to constantly reinvent some of the retail space in the building because of its scale, and that's helped us keep pace with the retail market over the last 17 years. I'm going to start in with some basic time bands in going back to about 2012. We were coming out of the recession. This scheme was pretty lucky. We didn't have any administrations here whatsoever, so we didn't have any income issues. The scheme traded its way through the recession gently, and we got to about 2012, and we started to look ahead to the 2015 renewals, because obviously in 2000 when we opened, 15-year leases were pretty normal, and we had quite a lot of them coming up. We had a very stable tenant base, and we knew that we needed to make sure that we were going to get the leases renewed and that we weren't going to end up with a lot of risk with tenants wanting to leave. So we started to look at the food court, which had been incredibly successful. It was very grab and go, quite a low price point, quite a high turnover, quite a brash, almost motorway service station atmosphere, but incredibly successful. So we had to be quite careful with it because it was performing quite strongly. What we actually did was we spent about £3.5 million tightening up the offer on the main dining level, and you'll see that when we're out in the malls. And we took quite a lot of space on the upper levels, which had previously been either fallow or just used for storage and backup, and we turned that into sit-down dining. And that proved incredibly successful. We deliberately focused the price point to make it affordable, because we knew we had a big student population, and because we knew we had a lot of grab-and-go customers who didn't want to suddenly start trying to pay £15 every time they came in for lunch, because they weren't going to do that. But it was incredible. It was so successful that it really focused our attention on the next phase of food, which we're going to come on to talk to in a minute. We achieved a 10% return on cost on our money invested straight away. We added significantly to the dwell time in the main shopping centre, so we added about 7 minutes to the dwell time. I think it was 70 minutes before and 77 minutes afterwards. So people were staying in the scheme a bit longer. The food was helping the retailers, and we basically right-sized the food to what at the time was basically Westfield standard in the UK. So we actually employed a designer who'd worked previously for Westfield in Australia, and she enabled us to bring the food up to a high standard at a really reasonable cost. So it was incredibly successful. It was, and we took it almost to an international level. So any retailer, any business-to-business meeting down here could be taken up there, and they could see that we'd invested very carefully to create something certainly with a national, regional platform. So moving forward to 2014, we're getting a bit closer to the lease renewals, and we're starting to look into the scheme at how we right-size some of our operators who had 15-year-old models. And as we were doing that, we were also committing £85 million to spend on Westquay South, which was originally known as Watermark, which was the major leisure destination, which is the real focus of today. There was a 23% under provision in catering at that time in Southampton. I remember there wasn't a Strada or a Café Rouge or any of those names that had emerged over the previous 10 years. No one really here. So there was an obvious opportunity, and we worked closely with Sarah, obviously identifying who might fit well into this market. But mostly we wanted to add some leisure, to add more dwell time, because the cinema offer in the city was very poor, bowling offer was very poor, and there was a whole area of land out there that had been sitting fallow for many years that was basically lost opportunity. So in 2014, we started the journey to create Westquay Watermark, which then became Westquay South. We managed to secure a great deal. We got the 4th Cine Deluxe in the UK, so you'll see that this afternoon. It's a very high-level cinema. It taps directly into what we talked about in terms of improving standards for everybody, improving expectations, and going beyond what people might expect. It's performing really strongly at the moment. We've put our first bowling our first bowling deal we've done in the UK came in underneath this. And we've let 22 restaurants in this scheme off the back of the cinema. The proven and researched demand, and through careful curation as we go through the next phase, we'll be letting restaurants here at new levels of rent, which will drive our ERV growth as we move in increasingly quickly to the first round of reviews in around 2020, 2021. So whilst this was all going on outside, on the inside of the building, we were talking to a lot of our operators like Next and Gap, who had renewals coming up. We were trying to work out what they wanted to do, what kind of space would be right for them in Southampton and in the region, because we wanted them to have regional flagships. And lots of different answers from this is too expensive for us, we want to leave, which was the answer from Gap, right the way through to Next saying, look, we need to upsize, we want to expand our offer. We've got complementary offers in the locality, either on the retail park with homewares or out on the motorway with a full line store. But we want flagship in central Southampton, which gave us lots of confidence to start changing the shape of the scheme, and we'll take you as Kate takes you through the malls this afternoon, and you see what we've done. You'll see lots and lots of right-sized stores. You'll see a regional Apple to the very, very latest standard. All of that really generated off the back of the confidence that this scheme gave retailers to stay here, because we were adding leisure and catering to a fundamentally very strong trading scheme, and because we could adapt the building. So we brought in, alongside Next, we brought in Victoria's Secret, which at the time was a real win for us. It's very difficult to get Victoria's Secret to commit to too many locations in the UK. They only wanted sort of super regional, very, very strategically important locations, and they were happy to choose this one. The story with Gap was quite different. We knew that they were trading under pressure because we obviously had their trading information, so we knew this was a situation that we needed to deal with. And we also knew that the store didn't sit particularly comfortably within the scheme, trading on two levels. It never really worked particularly for them, and that was exacerbating their problems. So we used that opportunity to start thinking about taking that store back to two levels, two different operators. And when we get out into the malls, you'll see what we managed to do, which was actually create a new catering anchor on the lower level, which actually started to drive a much more focused tenant mix on the lower level. The lower level had struggled for years in terms of ERV growth because it lacked a bit of identity, and the expiries enabled us to use that more effectively, to Ian's point, taking opportunities where retailers needed to make decisions to actually focus our product more strongly. And now we've got good ERV growth and good demand, and we'll talk to you a bit more about that as we walk around this afternoon. The other things that were happening at this same time, I talked about the IKEA. They built the store in isolation in 2009, and in 2015 we invested £700,000 creating a bridge link to IKEA because they get 6 million customers a year through that store, and there's a strong correlation between IKEA and John Lewis Homewares. It was crazy that we didn't have that obvious link to what was effectively another free anchor store. So we recreated that link. We worked with IKEA, we worked with our own infrastructure, and now people can walk between the two quite happily. And that's been a very helpful new permanent partnership for us at no cost. So we didn't pay anything for the IKEA, we just paid for the link. We've been constantly updating using product experience, as Sophie showed you. This scheme is pretty much flagship in the portfolio in terms of the investment we've put in. Nearly every single product initiative that we've signed up to is available and in use here and working really, really well. We've been updating ourselves, right-sizing, digitizing ourselves, putting in LED lights, putting PV on the roof, all of which is generating great income for us. So every initiative we've been able to commit to here has been really, really worthwhile. 80% of the money that we've invested in this scheme has generated a return since 2015. So much of the spend here, PV is a great example. We've got two arrays on the roofs, one on the new building, one on the existing, and we're planning another array on the car park. All of those are generating good returns to us. So as we make this investment, we do get the money back quite quickly. This is taking us further into the sort of the venue and destination side of what we're creating. As we evolved Westquay South, it became really obvious to us that we had a big area here, which you'll see when we go outside, which was a massive opportunity, but was also potentially a massive issue for us on a cold November afternoon. And many years ago, I remember having a conversation with Steve about how we were going to enliven this space and how we were going to treat this differently, because it was on a different scale to anything that we'd ever been involved with before. We had to keep the distance with the city walls because they're a scheduled ancient monument. They're very important, as you heard in the quiz this morning. And there's about 21 metres, I think, between them and us, and they're very visible. But we put £7 million worth of public realm in here. We got grant funding for that, plus some of our own money, to create a very, very high quality space. But obviously people are only going to go there if there's something to go there for. So we started talking about how we were going to create event management so that the restaurants that all overlook it would actually see things going on. This would create reputation, create a drive for people to actually go to the space and actually experience things that they couldn't do online. So we started talking about event management, and we invested £800,000 in an event management project which would drive events like, which is now culminating in things like the skating rink, which you're going to see almost ready to go, opens on Saturday, out in that event space now. And we've been incredibly successful at driving awareness. We got on the front page of the Times a while back for one of our art shows. And we're very, very happy, very, very pleased with the performance of this space, because we can monitor the way people use it, and obviously with the restaurants we're driving turnover into the restaurants all the time. We've also brought the city walls back into life, having been really obscured and forgotten about for many years. And for our local authority stakeholder here, that's really important. So on a long-term basis, we're engaging with them to do things, use the infrastructure of the city for sort of wider benefits. So they're pretty happy about that. This is the building that we created. So you've got the cinema on the top here, you can see. And I just want to talk just very briefly about these 3 bands of restaurants here, because what we were able to do here, and because of the scale of the building, was actually very carefully curate the kind of opportunities that diners have and make them very, very distinct on 3 different levels. And we did that through both use and rent. So this wasn't just about grabbing every single penny we could and then worrying later about whether or not Strada were going to survive here. This was about a mix that was actually going to work for the long term, because we're going to still be around to pick up the pieces if it goes wrong, but we're also here to reap the rewards of our success. And we knew that there was potentially some demand for restaurants in London that had never come outside the M25 before. And because of this approach, we did actually manage to deliver a couple of those. What we did was we took the top band, which is the least accessible band but the most exclusive location, and we were renting those restaurants at around £15 a foot. So not particularly challenging, but it did give us a better choice of some more international names and some more elusive names who were a bit more risk averse, but were able to come here and operate profitably at that level. On the middle level, number 2, we were pitching as our mainstream catering destination. It's easily the best connected to the rest of the scheme and to Southampton, and we got rent levels there around £40 a foot, which at the time was pretty much market norm, and that enabled us to bring in the big, powerful, well-known names, erring on the side of quality, and one or two hero brands as well. But that was a main driver of income for us, and we were very sure it would work, and they are all doing very, very well. We're going to L'Osteria this lunchtime. In fact, that was the first L'Osteria, I think, in the UK, very successful European brand that we went to see in Berlin. Untested in this market, but they were very confident they could step above the competition, and they're doing really well. The fit-out's really high quality. You'll see and feel and taste the quality when we're there shortly. And then on the lower level, level 3, which is the most connected to the event space, rents are around £30 a foot. We achieved these rents and more during the leasing. More challenging in some ways to let, a bit more destination, but actually still pretty accessible. And we've created a really exciting and vibrant mix there, directly connected to the event space. So as we develop the event space, those restaurants are really well positioned to draw spend straight off the mouth, straight into the shop when there's an event on. Now, this is all still evolving. You'll see 1 or 2 units that are still available. That's quite deliberate. On the inside, as we go into what we call the long room, there are still some opportunities for catering in there, which we've not been in a rush to lease, because we believe we need to see how customers like this building and how they use it. There are always going to be things that we need to change. The rents we're targeting inside are around £50 a foot, because that space it's internal. It's almost more like a concession in a department store than a standalone restaurant. We've got some restaurants operating in there already, but the smaller spaces are available, and we'll let those up in the coming year as we fine-tune the mix to what goes on in the cinema and how people like to use our catering. Now, this has all been very helpful for the main scheme. This enabled us to start, as I say, repurposing the lower level. We've done 12 deals on the scheme this year, including big names like Hugo Boss and Jules. The reason we got Hugo Boss interested on the lower level, it was primarily on the lower level. We put Carluccio's in. What we said to Carluccio's right at the very beginning, quite vociferously, was, "I'm really sorry you're not going in this scheme," which is where they really wanted to go. But we were able to use Carluccio's on the lower level of the centre. We've been trying for 5 years to get them to go there as a lower level anchor to create a more aspirational tenant mix, and they'd never been convinced. But with the not allowing them in here, it was so compelling that they wanted to be in Southampton. We put them into the lower level. They're doing really well, and on the back of Carluccio's, we're getting Hugo Boss and some better, more aspirational names on the lowest level of the centre, which is calmer and quieter, and takes maybe a slightly more mature shopper down into an area where they can shop in a slightly less bustling area. It's not the same ambience as the food court upstairs, which is still very, very lively. And the retailers are starting to appreciate that that's an area they may want to go if their brand fits into that model. Similarly, this is pumping about 30% more footfall on the lower level of the Mall than has ever walked through the Portland Terrace entrance before. And that's really helpful for us because it drives the lower level strategy cleverly, and also it enables us to let up some stubborn vacancies. We've had temporary lets down there for a while now, and they're all now starting to be let up on permanent leases. So this is a tangible effect of this development on the main scheme. So the synergy is very, very good. And rental growth is appearing. We're a couple of % up on the year. We're driving rents forward quite successfully, and we're renewing lots of our leases, albeit quite a lot of them are on upsizes or right sizes. But the point is people are voting with their feet that they really want to stay in this scheme, and that's really, really important for us. So if you look at the performance in terms of the sales, broadly we're growing share. Remember, this is a very mature and stable scheme, so we're never going to see abrupt changes in performance, but we are taking spend from other venues in the region. We're relatively stable on online sales here, and you heard about the Net Promoter Score. That's bringing people into the scheme, and over the last 3 years, we've grown 3% on what we're taking out of rest of Southampton and out of the area. So this is definitely having the right effects. Tenants are feeling the effect in their tills, and they're voting, to pay the rents to be here. So it's definitely working. This is a life cycle approach, so I'd be remiss if I didn't look into the future a little bit, because the obvious question is, okay, well, you've done all this great stuff, what now? This is the cinema block, and there's a site here called Phase 2, which we have an option on for a very long time. We're now working very closely with the local authority to deliver a Phase 2 scheme here with a residential tower, retail on the lower level, and a hotel. We're very, it feeds directly into the public realm and the event space, so we're very, very interested in A, the quality of what this looks like, and B, specifically what happens on the interaction level on the ground floor. So we're progressing this scheme now with the local authority on the basis that we will retain control of the ground floor, maybe bring in a third party to develop the expertise to develop the residential, so take out the capital risk on that, but actually make sure that the restaurants down in here, of which there'll be another 30 or 40,000 square feet, will be directly under our control all the time, so that we don't get a situation where we're introducing competition that would not actually necessarily help us down here. So that should come out of the ground hopefully in the next few years. The other areas of the scheme where we've got opportunity in here this is the roof of Marks & Spencer. Very cleverly, when the building was built in the late 90s, the structure was put in place so that another floor could be added to that space. So it is possible, and although we're a long way away from it right today, we may well be able to put a mall through from the lower level as we stabilise the lower level mall with the better quality retailers. We may be able to move Marks & Spencer's up a level and then bring a mall directly through to connect into the food, into Westquay South, probably over the next 5 to 10 years, and that's an initiative that we'll take up with M&S at the appropriate time. So there's lots of potential here. We're going to be improving some of the entrances to bring some of this architecture into Bargate. As we heard earlier on, architecture is important because it's about identity and status, and we can take some of the themes of this architecture to update the outside of our building as we move through into the next decade. So that's really it from me. There's lots to look forward to here. Our joint venture partners, GIC, have renewed their agreement for us to manage this scheme. We had a 15-year agreement with them, which they've renewed on the same terms. So we're very happy. We've got a very happy, stable partner. There's lots here, lots of growth here. Events and quality is very, very much on our mind. But I think this is about connected regional excellence where more happens, and I think this is just about the best example of it in our portfolio. Thanks.
Thank you, Pete. Well, hopefully that's whet your appetite for both lunch and the tour afterwards, when you can find out a bit more about what we've been up to here. So thank you very much for your attention here this morning, and looking forward to a good lunch.